Good evening and welcome to this live virtual town hall with your state lawmakers, Senator Annette Cleveland, Representative Sharon Wylie, and Representative Monica Stonier. My name's Andy. I'm going to be your off-camera moderator for this evening. The 2021 legislative just wrapped up on time a few weeks ago, and tonight is your opportunity to ask your state lawmakers any questions you have about the bills that the lawmakers passed and the other issues that they discussed. We sent out a SurveyMonkey questionnaire earlier this week and got a lot of questions from folks in the 49th Legislative District. Also got other questions via email and other sources. We are also live tonight on multiple different streaming platforms. So if you have any questions throughout the evening, you're more than welcome to submit them in the comments section of YouTube or Facebook, and we will answer those as well. So tonight is all about asking your questions and giving you a recap of the legislative session. I will turn it over now to Senator Annette Cleveland for some opening remarks.
Thank you, and good evening, everybody. We're pleased to be here with you, and thank you for joining us. I am always honored to be a part of this very strong 49th Legislative District team. The three of us, of course, representing you in the legislature in Olympia. And I'm Senator Annette Cleveland, and looking forward to your questions tonight and a discussion of the 2021 legislative session. And I'll begin by just sharing a brief summary, if you will, but first want to make certain that my seatmates have an opportunity to also introduce themselves. So, Sharon.
It's great to be here. It'd be better to be in person, but this is almost as good, and we're pretty used to it by now. I'm Sharon Wylie. I've been one of the representatives here since 2011. I serve on the Finance Committee. I'm Vice Chair of the Transportation Committee, and I'm also back on the Commerce and Gaming Committee. This was a very momentous session, and we'll have a lot to say about it, and I'm hoping to really hear from a lot of people tonight. I am very proud of the work that we did. We had fewer issues to deal with because it was so hard to get our work done virtually, and we wouldn't have been able to do it without our incredible staff who really stepped up as they are tonight and made it feel very effective. And we'll talk more about that. But now I think we'll hear from Monica.
Thanks, Sharon. Monica Stonier, proud to serve the 49th Legislative District with my seatmates here. I am on the Education Committee in the House. I'm on the House Appropriations Committee and also serve on the House Healthcare Committee, and am proud to serve my caucus as the majority floor leader. I would say that, yes, this remote session was quite challenging, but Washington was very successful in having a transmission-free and very safe session this year so that we could do the work of the people. And again, appreciate the credit that we give to staff for making that happen. Looking forward to questions tonight and looking forward to a live town hall in the future.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more. And I'll briefly share that I currently serve as chair of the Senate Healthcare Committee. I also sit on the Senate Transportation Committee, as well as the Rules Committee. And new this year, I also joined the Senate Housing and Local Government Committee. So looking forward to talking more about the work of those committees, as well as take your questions on other issues that the legislature considered this year. As you well know, we entered the legislative session in January facing some very urgent and emergent issues. We were in the midst of the continued pandemic. We had faced pretty devastating wildfires, as we can all remember from last fall. There were so many who still were struggling to obtain unemployment because they'd potentially lost their jobs due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And of course, that against the backdrop of racial injustice, of an insurrection in our nation's capital just prior to the legislative session beginning. So we had great many urgent emergent issues to address. And I'm really proud of the fact that as a legislature, we prioritized and we were able to make tremendous progress on continued COVID response, on climate action, on police reform, on childcare and early learning, on housing and a more just economy. And I'll share really briefly that coming into session, myself and my colleagues in the Senate, in the Democratic caucus, committed that we were going to view every issue through an equity lens, and not just the policy issues that we were considering, but the budget as well. And I'm really pleased that we very much adhered to that commitment. We also discussed that rather than try to strive to get back to the status quo in the state as we were facing all these big challenges, we were committed to making changes that were going to build a stronger state for everyone. And so I think that we were very successful in being strategic and focused on those priorities. So happy to talk more about what we worked on for the 49th Legislative District, or take any other questions that you might have. So looking forward to good discussion. And with that, I'll open it up for questions.
Sounds good. Yeah, thank you for that recap and for those introductions. Again, folks, if you're just now tuning in, this is a live virtual town hall with your lawmakers, Senator Cleveland, Representative Wylie, and Representative Stonier. So if you have a question for your lawmakers tonight, just go ahead and put that in the chat box below, and we'll get to as many as we can within the next hour or so. First question we have came in from SurveyMonkey via Curtis, who wanted to know what the legislature and what the three of you were doing this year to help with the homelessness crisis.
I'm happy to start, but I hope my seatmates will chime in as well. We continue to make tremendous investments in housing and homelessness. And I think the three biggest policies that we worked on this past year and passed was Senate Bill 5160, which protected tenants and better supported landlords. It created the first in the nation statewide right to counsel, ensuring that low-income tenants would have access to free court-appointed attorneys when facing any legal issues around their housing. We passed House Bill 1236, which has been years in the making, and it is just cause evictions. It requires landlords to provide a good cause for evicting a tenant. And then House Bill 1277, which was also aimed at eviction prevention and housing stability, and helped to fund housing services and eviction prevention services. As we know, the pandemic forced so many into really difficult situations, and the last thing that anybody should have to face is concern and fear of losing their home.
I was going to identify those three bills as well, Senator Cleveland. So those are definitely, I think, bills that were very impactful for those that are struggling with housing security. And, you know, I'm just recalling the debate on the House floor around many of these and these discussions, and I'm very appreciative of those of you who ensured that stories of people struggling and who needed the passage of these policies were in our inboxes, that have called our offices. I know that at one point in time, I called home to get some details on a specific story that I knew needed to be told from Southwest Washington, because there was some criticism that these solutions and that the challenge was really Seattle-centric. And actually, we know that this has been a crisis in Southwest Washington for a long time. So in addition to the 3 bills Senator Cleveland mentioned, our budgets also continue to invest more money in the programs that we had in the past to ensure that tenants and landlords had some financial security as we recover from the pandemic. So there were policies passed, but also we continued to invest in those programs that we know helped keep people housed and helped keep landlords paid.
I'd like to add that over the last 10 years, I've seen a lot more support and understanding of the many causes of homelessness. And there wasn't one thing, because there isn't just one problem to address. And protecting people in the current crisis was urgent. And we used some of the, a lot of the federal dollars that came to us to address that. We tried to boost the existing funds, like the Housing Trust Fund that goes out to communities and is flexible. And we also, every year that we go into session, we loosen up the rules so that communities have a little more flexibility to really target the needs in their community. And fixing something this big, particularly with the pandemic, is a real challenge. I think that it's progress that more people understand that it's not simple. And I think there's a huge commitment to keep moving forward and not just say that we threw a patch and we addressed the emergency and now we're done. We're not done. Along with what we have done for regular people who are housing challenged because of the crisis, we are in the process of really building out our community-based mental health systems. 40, 50 years ago, the federal government started walking away from subsidized housing and providing federal dollars to help us with housing needs. At the same time, we started realizing that our state institutions nationally were hellholes. And we rightly tried to back away from that, but we didn't step up. No state stepped up and provided the community-based mental health system. We are in the process of really doing cutting-edge things to make sure that not only do we address the housing issues, but we do the kind of mental health and physical health system approach that we should have done 40 years ago when we started shutting down those bad institutions, so that people can get well, they can get stable, and they can be part of their community. So all of that is a work in progress. Stay tuned, because we're going to keep working on this.
That is a great segue to our next question from Joe, who submitted a question on Facebook. You just did a great answer of his first part of his question about what the legislature has done, but Joe's asking what is going to be on deck possibly for next year and the years to come, specifically to address the rise in housing costs.
I'll take a little shot at that. That's a big question. One of the things that is happening that is a little bit different, that I think shows some hope. Some people have blamed land use regulations and environmental regulations for the price of housing. It's not that simple, but to the degree that that flexibility for locals to have more ADUs, accessory dwelling units, the tiny house movement, all of that plays into our land use laws. And this is a year that there was a lot of coming together of both Republicans and Democrats to say, what can we do to update our land use laws to make sure that there is the type of housing that meets the needs of every person and does it in an affordable way. So there's a lot more, there was a lot more work this year at trying to do that, at trying to provide more flexibility, better use of land, that if we're going to have land use laws, let's make them work and make sure that they aren't contributing unduly to the price of housing. But I think the big question is, how do we deal with income equity? You know, how do we create good paying jobs for everybody? And what do we do about this unprecedented time in our society where the gap between the highest pay and the entry level pay for jobs that used to be able to support a family is so great that people can't afford to eat, live, and take care of their kids?
I'll only reinforce Sharon's comments by saying, you know, specifically, we have addressed some of the policy issues, but really it's a matter of implementation at the local level. So we will stay in touch with our local folks to keep an eye on inventory and make sure that the inventory in the housing market in Southwest Washington is not at the very top end where people don't have access to investment in home ownership. And then again, as we discussed all throughout the legislative session, really looking at the equity in the access to those financial tools and to the wealth that opens the door to home ownership to our community. And so while we can pass policy, it's really the implementation and the work at the community level that we will have to keep ongoing in order to really make movement here.
Joe, I appreciate your question, and particularly the highlighting of the fact that we need to continue to do all we can to better support and incentivize home ownership, so families do have the ability to build some equity and have the opportunity to build some wealth. And I think that's going to take all of us looking at various ways to go about that. There has been an effort in the legislature. We did pass bill recently to try to make it less challenging to build condominiums, because oftentimes that those housing units that are available for purchase can be more affordable, but there were some barriers to our state laws that prevented the development of or condominiums being built. So you know, I think we're just going to have to look at the full complement of how we can make all manner of various different housing options available to people.
All right, so the next question we have came in earlier this week from Lizzie, who wants to know if the COVID-19 vaccine will be mandatory when shopping in stores this year.
We're getting this question a lot. And, you know, at this point in time, the vaccine is limited in whether or not it can be mandated, particularly for us at the legislative level. But independent businesses have the right to determine what policy they want to adopt in order to keep their customers and their workers safe. I know that there has been a bit of pushback on either any policy that seems to come forward. And so what we really need to do is just remember that the pandemic is not over, that the vaccine is important for the safety of the community at large, and that the businesses that choose to put a policy in place that they feel works best for keeping their business safe would appreciate not only our patronage, but also our support in their decisions there.
And Lizzie, that's an excellent question. And I know from the state perspective and from my work with the Senate Healthcare Committee, the focus has really been on providing information and education around the vaccine and ensuring that we're meeting people where they are in their communities to answer questions, and ensuring that their providers, those who are trusted within their circles, have the information to share as well, and recognize that it is the decision of each individual and each individual family in regard to vaccines.
Excellent, thank you for that. Again, folks, this is a live virtual town hall. If you've got a question, go ahead and submit that in the comment section of your platform there, and we'll get to as many as we can tonight. Next, we have a question from Tony, healthcare question. what are you doing? I'm going to paraphrase a little bit because his question was a little longer, but what are you doing to support a public option healthcare system in Washington state? And what can proponents do to fight back against efforts by the health insurance industry who are trying to stop public option policies?
Thank you for the question, Tony. And I'm proud to say that our state was the first in the nation to pass public option healthcare coverage, and that is offered through our state's health benefit exchange. And this year, we built on that foundation to also begin to stand up healthcare coverage premium subsidies so that those who are just unable to purchase healthcare insurance because they can't afford it will have some additional support and help so that they are able to buy coverage for themselves and their families. So we have been hard at work here in our state ensuring that we're putting those choices in place for individuals. I'll also mention that we did that in collaboration with some of our health insurers. Not all of them were supportive of a public option, but there were those that were. And I'm a firm believer as a policymaker in ensuring that everyone is at the table and everyone has a voice and that everyone's voice is heard. And I think that in that way, we are able to hopefully pass the strongest policy possible, but also have the needed support to implement the policy.
And to answer the what I remember of the second part of the question, which was, what can folks do to keep that moving forward? I think the more we hear as lawmakers here in the 49th, but across the state. So if you have friends and family that live in other districts, I'd encourage you to encourage them to do the same. It's always helpful when we hear from you what a difference it would make for your access to healthcare. And it keeps us thinking about the problems that need to be solved. It keeps us motivated to keep moving in the right direction, to bring the high cost of care down and to increase access for everybody in Washington. So to keep in touch with us and to keep us posted on your preferences and what it would mean for your family, I think is also really important.
All right, and sticking with the healthcare theme here, we had a question submitted earlier this week from Gail. Wanted to thank you for supporting telehealth and Cascade Care subsidies. She says we are looking forward to broadband build out and continued work to control prescription drug costs. We hope that remains a focus of the state and federal cooperation. And I know it's early, but what bills which failed in the healthcare arena do you see coming back in 2022?
Gail, thank you for that question. There's a lot of information in your question. I appreciate that. There is obviously no shortage of issues for us to continue working on in the healthcare space. But to answer your question directly, the bills that were introduced this year that didn't move forward, that I'm sure will continue to be discussed and that we will hopefully continue to work on next year, would be first and foremost the role of dental therapists in our state. That's been an issue that's been around for quite a while, and currently we don't have that provider designation in the state of Washington. Other states do, like Alaska. And so I would expect we'll continue to talk about that. A bill did not pass this year that was put forward around removing barriers and challenges to accessing death with dignity. And so I think that that'll be continued to be discussed. And we're going to continue to discuss telemedicine and the need to continue to update our laws and statutes, given that telemedicine has been so critical, particularly in this pandemic, to providing care when you can't always see your provider face to face. So those are just a few that come to mind.
All right, thank you for that question. We're going to switch gears here a little bit, figuratively, and go to a transportation question. We have a question here submitted earlier this week. What would a transportation revenue package have done in terms of a new I-5 bridge, and what happens without that revenue package?
I'll take that one since I'm Vice Chair of Transportation. Excuse me. Leading up to the session, I and a small team met with 101 stakeholders in 81 meetings between the end of session and Thanksgiving to talk about what should be in a transportation package and how should we pay for it and what are the priorities of each community. And we talked to everybody from the environmental community to the disabled community to the people who haul the asphalt, airplanes, boats, trains and cars and buses. So we came in with a really strong package. It was different than the package that had been developed on the Senate side and that the governor had developed. And we worked very, very hard to do the budget that would adjust to the changes and the loss of revenue that we had. All of our projects were on pause before the session because of the initiative. And when that was overturned by the court, then that meant that we could deal with that budget and modify it. But we had probably a much greater loss in the transportation budget than the operating budget had. The buying things by mail and paying sales tax on them kept part of our budget a little less bad off than the transportation budget, where we lost gas tax, we lost tolls, we lost ferry fares. So, you know, we had a lot of adjusting to do. Several years ago, or a couple of years ago, we did fund the preliminary work to get the bridge back on track, and that work is proceeding. We're working well with the Oregon folks. The package that we proposed had upwards of $1 billion in both the Senate and the House budget. There was a little bit of difference there. The package hasn't passed just yet, but we're still working on it and trying to come to an agreement that we can live with and be ready when there is federal dollars to match it. And we're, you know, in best case scenario, that package would be ready and the feds would act sometime in September, so we'd know what we had to respond to and what we could partner with in order to meet our transportation needs for the next 15 to 20 years. So all of that is a work in progress. Most transportation packages don't get done the first year that they're proposed. And we've got the funding to continue the work on the bridge, so that when we're done, when we're ready, those federal and state dollars will be there because we will have worked out the details. So we did what both the House and the Senate did. We looked at the past, current, and future inequities in our transportation programs. This is a year where we were dealing with carbon from cars. We've dealt with it every other place, but the big place where we haven't done enough is the carbon that's produced from our transportation system. So it became more complicated, but we're still working really hard. The work doesn't stop just because we didn't get something done in one session.
And I'm going to just quickly add, you know, in the meantime, as Sharon mentioned, we have our bi-state legislative action committee for the I-5 bridge replacement that's active and moving forward the work of the project. And we have our project office that Greg Johnson leads, and that is funded by an appropriation that we all worked to secure. Goodness, I've lost track. I think it was 2 years ago now. And so the work of the project does continue, and all of the important community conversations that have to go on around that are taking place. So I'm sure you're hearing about that, and you'll hear more about that as that work continues.
All right, next we have an education-related question. This one is for Representative Stonier, but certainly if the other lawmakers want to chime in as well. What are lawmakers doing about education and getting kids back into the classroom this fall?
Well, while we were in session, we were sure to pass along the federal financial support that came to the state, thanks to the federal government and the leadership there, straight to schools so that we could ensure that schools were well funded for the now myriad of delivery of education strategies that are in place. So I know that while, we were in session and we wanted to make sure that funding went through, we also took a look at some of the policy shifts that we needed to make. We've uncovered some challenges that we knew existed in the past with regard to funding, but we also have learned a great deal about what students have been left out of the communication in school in general. And so from a lawmaker's standpoint, I know that we are going to continue to work with and monitor through the district level and the building levels. And of course, hearing from families is really important as well. How that return to school and how the recovery from this past year is going. In my day job, working for Evergreen Schools, I'm spending a lot of time right now working with teachers who are trying to identify students who would benefit from some support over the summer, some extended hours, and districts are working to figure out exactly how they can deliver that additional support for students between, today and when we go back to school in the fall again. I know that anybody working in schools knows that the behavioral health needs of students that have been out of school, not only feeling isolated, but also dealing with the anxiety and depression that comes from either that isolation or just concern about what is going on in their communities, or in many cases, kids who are at home who in unstable housing situations, unmet food needs. All of this is going to need to be addressed when we see students back in school. And I know we're really working on the social emotional support that students need when they come so that they can be ready to learn academically. And I am encouraging families and educators to remember that kids need to feel connected to their school, and that helps them to learn. And so if you're doing anything to help keep your students connected over the summertime, the fall will go much smoother. We know that it is the expectation of OSPI, our agency here, to make sure that as many kids as possible have access to in-person school. And it has been shown through the data that I have seen from Department of Health reports that the transmissions in schools is incredibly low. I have observed that it's because students are doing a good job of following the distancing and the masking rules that we have in place. And many schools can identify if there is a positive test or a positive case of COVID-19, they're able to isolate those students and the group of students that they've been with and have those students kind of removed for a couple of weeks until that incubation time passes. And that really keeps the numbers low. We are struggling to do that in the broader community, but schools have been incredibly successful, which means we feel comfortable getting students back to school. The only thing I would mention is the challenge with having our staff vaccinated and prepared and safe at school. And that is going much better than it did a couple of months ago. So I know that schools and educators are doing their best to prepare for the return of students, as many students as possible in the fall, mine included.
All right, next we are going to go to a question about our tax structure. This one was directed from Mike, sent to Senator Cleveland, but feel free to other lawmakers chime in as well. Senator Cleveland, why do you believe the majority of Republicans were right and the majority of Democrats were wrong on the capital gains tax bill?
Thank you for the question, Mike. And my concern around the capital gains tax was not the concern that I heard the Republicans express. My concern around the capital gains tax when we considered it first early on in the Senate was that I felt strongly that the first revenue vote that we should be considering in the legislature should be the one that would have the greatest return on investment. And that, in my mind, was investing in our transportation infrastructure. And my concern was that we would not take that vote in moving forward a transportation revenue package if we had already approved other new forms of revenue. That said, I have always strongly believed that we must address our state's very regressive and unfair tax system, the most regressive in the country. And so while I'm disappointed that we didn't pass a transportation revenue package this year, I'm very pleased to have cast my final vote in support of the capital gains tax. And in fact, the second time it came back to the Senate, felt much more comfortable with the fact that the revenue was directed to support for childcare. And that is something that does have a very high return on investment and something that I very much could support. And that's why I cast my vote in favor of capital gains tax at the end of the.
All right, thank you for that. Next, we have I believe it's a Facebook comment that came in from Jim. Thank you for, and sorry, Representative Stonier, that's covering you up a little bit there. Thank you from Friends of Vancouver Lake with your great work on helping Vancouver Lake. We couldn't do it without your united support. Next step is a good hydrology study. State agencies own both water and the lake bed. So how do you think we can persuade them to help?
Great question, Jim, and thank you for it. And really happy to have been able to be successful with my two seatmates in ensuring that there was funding in the state operating budget that we passed this year to help address the health of Vancouver Lake, which is such a tremendous asset to our community. And feel that that was the first step of providing some funding so that then we could bring stakeholders together and begin talking about next steps and the work of ultimately putting together a strategic lake management plan so we can ensure that we're better protecting that resource, not just today, but for the future.
And I would just say that the work that you all have done at Friends of Vancouver Lake has really helped educate me about the long-range economic benefit to the region, the livability, the recreation, and the sheer joy of living in Southwest Washington that will be enhanced as we move forward with the development of Vancouver Lake into the vision that I think we all share. The one thing we can do is help the agencies see that vision. And I think you've got 3 partners here that are committed to doing that. And I think that with that, by broadening that shared vision, we will continue to make progress. And I think we can persuade them to be helpful.
I think that all of us have to keep stepping up and making sure that all of our elected officials know how important this is to the community. And we've worked with our city, our county, our court on many things over the years. And this is something that they maybe didn't expect to be working on right now. But there's jobs, there's water quality, there's a lot there. And when elected officials know how important it is to their people, they will step up, and having that money available, and thank you, teammates, is going to make it a lot easier because we need a long-term solution. And because the lake has multiple government jurisdictions with some ownership and some responsibility and a lot of unclarity, it's going to take a real strong public effort to put together an entity whose solely responsible for making sure that that asset is there for our children and grandchildren.
All right, thank you for that question, Jim. Next, we have a question that came in from William, who's watching us on our YouTube channels. Wants to know where are the increasing costs in healthcare economics coming from?
William, that's a complicated question, but I appreciate it very much. There are so many different factors. I think that obviously the technology and cost of technology and keeping up with the technology is very expensive. That's always evolving. The rising cost of prescription drugs, it adds a tremendous amount of cost to our current healthcare system. And I think the fact that our current healthcare system still continues to focus on sick care, on urgent and emergent care. And we have to continue keeping our shoulders to the wheel and making that tremendous shift from a system of sick care to a system of wellness and prevention. And that's why we put so much focus in the state toward access to primary care and making sure that there's access to coverage. And no one should be without health care coverage. And while we've made strides here in the state in expanding access to health care coverage, there are still those in the state who don't have any health care. And we established this past legislative session, in fact, a Universal Healthcare Commission. And that commission is going to take up the work of the Universal Healthcare Task Force that we established a couple of years ago that made recommendations to us. One of the recommendations was to establish this commission to continue the work of laying the foundation for universal healthcare, ensuring that every single individual has healthcare. And that healthcare is a right in this.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. I will just also share that the passage of a drug transparency bill from the past session helps us know what to do. And Senator Cleveland's work on that was, incredibly important for the passage of the bill. And as we see the results from what we will uncover from some of the very protected parts of the financial chain of the healthcare system, we will know what to do next, what we will attack next to help bring the cost of healthcare down. And so some of the solution is on its way.
All right, thank you for that. Next, we have a question about climate change that was submitted earlier this week. We are in a climate crisis, but I'm worried we won't be able to reverse course before it's too late. Did the legislature pass any bills that would help?
Yes, the legislature did. And we are now ranked the highest, the best, and the strongest in environmental policy after the bills that we passed this past session when it comes to work done at the state level. Washington has been leading on some of these issues for a long time, and so I'm not at all surprised. This year we passed the low carbon fuel standard, and we passed a cap and invest bill that takes the biggest pollutants in our state and rethinks the approach to really reverse the clock. There are a number of other policies as well, and many of them are actually hidden in some of the other bills that may not go through the Environment Committee. They might go through the Local Government Committee, but it is definitely it will continue to be a top priority for us in the legislature to continue making progress there. I agree that we are in a crisis. I also feel incredibly accountable to the generations that are coming up and holding us accountable, and for the generations that will follow, that we do good work without delay on this as the next legislative session approaches as well.
All right, our next question was another big topic the legislature dealt with this year. Submitted earlier this week. What did the legislature do this year on police accountability and reform? and also what work still needs to be done in the coming years.
Yeah, we made great progress, I believe, in a short amount of time. There's much work that is left undone that will continue, but we took up this issue of police accountability very seriously this session. We made progress where we could find agreement and solutions that made sense, and the longer conversations will be ready for us when we return to the next legislative session. We were able to pass a bill that outlaws or that prohibits the use of no-knock warrants and chokeholds, and much of what has been the discussion of some of the in a police tactics bill, much of what has been the discussion of unsafe practices when not used properly and when used disproportionately on particularly our Black and Brown community members. So I think we made considerable progress there. We also, when we passed I-940 in the past, there were some discussions that were started but not finished, and many of those continued this legislative session to result in, I believe, better policy and accountability. We're also moving toward independent investigations and prosecutions so that any police officers who are involved in excessive use of force and fatalities as a result of that will not be investigated by those involved in that particular community. And we're working to stand up a state effort so that we have specialized a legal team and accountability team there, but also so that communities that do find themselves in that type of investigation can be assured that it is investigated independently of those who were involved. So I'm proud of the good work that we were able to do. And in fact, we have a lot of law enforcement and former law enforcement people in the legislature. And I think that really helped to inform the policy so that we were sure that not only was it going to be better and safer for our community members, but also with thought to how law enforcement can evolve and should evolve.
Monica did such a good job of summarizing all the work that we did around police accountability, and we passed no fewer than 12 different new bills focused on this, and a tremendous amount of our time and energy was put toward this because it's so critical. It's so important because we recognize that in communities around the state, trust has been broken, and people's lives have been shattered as a result. We have to work to better ensure that we're building safe and healthy communities, and that our citizens can feel that there's trust. So I was going to also mention that we do have continued work to do in this area, and I'm really proud particularly of the fact that again, as I said at the outset, we kept our focus and looked through the lens of equity and equality for every policy that we passed this session, but particularly the police accountability and police reform bills that we passed.
All right, going back to the topic of vaccinations again, a question that was received earlier this week. I'm relieved to see progress on getting control of the pandemic, but it seems like vaccination rates are unusually low for Clark County compared to the rest of the state. What can be done to change people's attitudes and acquire the herd immunity we need so we can be safe and safely reopen?
Well, again, this is a question we're getting often. In fact, I'm looking at Senator Cleveland on my screen here because I know we have been in a couple of meetings recently where this question has come. And one of the things that I've learned a great deal about is the power of information and education when it comes to talking with community members who are hesitant or need more information from a trusted source about the safety of getting the vaccine and what it would mean. And then there are a lot of people who are just hesitant because they don't like getting shots. And when they realize that that is And in fact, this is one of the reasons why the one-shot Johnson, the J&J version that was just one shot was so highly requested, because you'd only had to go get it one time. And so for people that just are squeamish about getting shots, reminding them the safety that it provides and the health protection to the community, it goes a long way. And so I've noticed that there's a lot of PR out there right now, people doing neighbor-to-neighbor conversations. I know that church leaders are answering questions that folks have about the vaccine, and that when public health and community leaders and neighborhood leaders have an opportunity to answer questions with the facts, people increase their likelihood of getting the vaccine. And so that's a little bit more groundwork, and it takes a little bit more time, but I am just really pleased to see that now children who I know have been waiting to feel safe before returning to sports or school have access to the vaccine. I know that my kids couldn't wait to have that protection. They're about 4 days away from safely hugging grandma and grandpa, so they're looking forward to that. And that students that are anxious to return safely to school and know they have the protection of the vaccine alleviates their mental health concerns a great deal as well. So I'm glad that is now available. So we'll see a spike in access now that children have access to it. But again, we're going to come back to that tapered off level when we hit that hesitancy and that education requirement. But I'm sure Senator Cleveland and Representative Wylie may have more to add.
Well, I think that the more people that share that they had the shot, it didn't hurt, and the side effects were worth it, if they were any side effects at all. I think that we just need to talk to each other and listen to each other. I think we'll get to a point where there will be a tipping point where it'll seem kind of silly to not have the shot, and peer pressure, as long as it's respectful, is a good thing.
And I'll just share that vaccine distribution has been one of the things that I've spent the majority of my time working on in tandem with our Department of Health and the governor's office over the course of the last 5-6 months. And you've probably noticed that, as Monica said, there's now been a shift away from those mass vaccination sites to vaccines available more through provider offices and through local community clinics, so that patients can talk directly with those healthcare providers that they have a relationship with and that they trust, to get their questions answered and make sure that they feel that the vaccine is safe. I know for me, when my daughter received her second dose of the vaccine, she looked at me and said, "Mom, I didn't realize that this would give me such hope for the future and for our world hopefully returning to some semblance of normalcy." So I certainly can attest to the vaccine being safe and effective, and hope that all of us can embrace that hope for the future and do everything in our power to encourage others to get vaccinated as well.
All right, next question is a topic that was in the news recently. Internet connectivity has been a problem in many communities, especially during the pandemic. Can lawmakers help get broadband out to more homes?
I'd love to start with that. I know we all have a concern, and the pandemic really made urgent something that we actually have been talking about for about 10 years. And there were a number of things done. We passed a bill that will allow utilities, local utility districts, to offer broadband. Not all will, but that barrier has been there for a long time, and now it's gone. I have a bill that I'm very proud of that we're going to be doing a whole lot of transportation projects. The fish culverts that were mandated to replace all over the state are going to be an opportunity to incorporate broadband conduit into our infrastructure for the future. And we're going to be doing that and removing the barriers, and the federal government is working in tandem with us to make sure that we can do that, and that we think about it early enough in the project that it doesn't add costs. And so that bill was focused on transportation, but there were efforts in a lot of different arenas to try to make sure that not only does everybody have broadband, but we have good broadband, sufficient broadband for jobs, for education, for public health. And I think that one of the silver linings of the pandemic is it raised the level of urgency, told us what we need to do, and by golly, we took some big steps.
There was a misconception that this was more prevalent a problem in rural areas, and what we know, and many people who live in urban areas already knew, that it really is about the speed and quality of that access. It's not just about whether or not you're wired, and especially given how much healthcare, how much education, and how much business, small business work has been done from home across on the web, on the phone. It has been clear to us that we have investment to do so that this infrastructure, as it ought to be seen, is the way we've viewed it in Washington for a while. And now we are in a position to make good progress on that after the investments this year that we made in broadband. And I think our policy actually sets the stage for many other states to be thinking about broadband access as a utility or as infrastructure that is absolutely necessary, and not necessarily a commodity.
All right, thank you for that question. We are just about out of time here, but one thing that's kind of unique that some people may not have known who are watching tonight or listening tonight, this was a mostly remote legislative session, given the pandemic and the other situations going on. So I just wanted to toss that out there real briefly for each of you, what your experience was like as chair, as a vice chair, as the floor leader in the House. What was your experience like this session compared to others doing it mostly virtually like we are here?
Well, I'll start because as the floor leader, I was quite lonely without all my colleagues around to visit with. There were only 2 or 3 people from each caucus allowed in the building and on the floor during the legislative session. And normally the halls are teeming with bustling constituents and the noise of lobbyists working policy. And so it was quite lonely, and I was there. Now, the view of the Senate, of course, there's a few more people there. They have a little bit more real estate. They have more square footage around each person and fewer members. And you can see I'm there on the floor with the Republican floor leader. And it was challenging at times, but I'm real proud of the work that our staff did to make sure that we could have a session. And, I think many of our members appreciated if we were able to get done with our work in time, having dinner with their families because they were working remotely and voting remotely because of the good work that our staff did. I was in town every day that we had floor action. So that was about 3 days a week, unless it was cutoff time. And then I was there for 2 or 3 weeks straight at those 2 windows of time. And, I can just say when I'm there by myself, I really miss my colleagues, but I was glad that folks were safe and that we were able to not only stay protected from risks of contracting COVID-19, but also from the threats our state capitol faced leading up to and after the insurrection of our nation's capital, a dark day that I know many of us were disappointed to see. And then we will continue to keep an eye on those threats so that we can make sure that the building is safe for us to work in and for the public to participate in.
I think one of the, as the vice chair, calling on people and keeping track of the people that were wanting to testify verbally or to weigh in, there were hundreds and hundreds of people that I don't think had ever testified before that were able to do that. And there were some rough edges and it was uncomfortable, but a lot more people participated, but it wasn't the same. And I guess, one of the biggest things for me at home was that my husband couldn't believe how long my meetings were and how many there were. And I kept saying, well, honey, this is what I do when I'm in Olympia, when you don't see me. But it was, and keeping the cats off my lap was a struggle. But I think the good news is that we got a lot more participation. And I think we'll figure out ways to continue that so that not everybody has to drive to Olympia or hire a lobbyist in order to have access in the heat of the session. All of us are accessible outside of session. But I still had my 15-minute meetings with constituents. So either by phone or the way we are right now. And so we got used to it. I think sitting that long and not being able to walk around was tough on the bodies. But we survived, and I don't think there's any other legislature in the country where staff and legislators didn't get sick. A lot of legislatures shut down for a bit because they had outbreaks. We did not one.
And I'll just add, because I know we're getting close to conclusion tonight, but leading up to session, staff did just a tremendous amount of work building and designing an online system that was workable. And I will admit that all of us were expecting that the session would be slow and that we would have to really temper our expectations around what we could accomplish virtually. And I am here to say we had one of the most successful legislative sessions in years, and we accomplished more than I think any of us could have imagined. And yes, as Sharon said, it was challenging to be tied to your computer screen 16 hours a day and literally not have time sometimes to even grab food. And it was sometimes challenging to communicate with the people that you needed to, staff and your colleagues, to talk about the various policies that were being considered. But overall, it was largely just a tremendous success. And I doubt there'll ever be another session that I can spend almost entirely in my sweatpants.
And on that note, we are going to wrap up now. So thank you for that. That is all the time we have for tonight. If we did not get to your question, which usually happens because we get a lot more questions than we have time for, in just a few moments, I'm going to throw up the contact information for each of your lawmakers up on the screen. So please feel free to contact your lawmakers there, and they will be able to get back to you after tonight's town hall. So thank you again all, and I'll turn it over to the lawmakers if you want to give some brief closing remarks before we end.
I'll start the closing remarks, I guess. I am very proud to serve the 49th Legislative District and Southwest Washington at large on many issues. We each have some areas of expertise, and we're well distributed in the 49th district. And I think that serves, again, not just the district, but the region well. And so I'm proud of the work that we do together as a team. I'm thankful for the feedback, the questions, the guidance, and criticism that we get in our inboxes and phone calls that come into the office. I think that keeps us well informed. And so I encourage folks to continue to do that. I'm proud to have just concluded a session where we delivered on many of the priorities we set out to do, which is to work to recover and to end the pandemic, both the economic impacts and our health impacts. to do that work with a lens of equity. And that equity lens was used in every bill, committee, and consideration for the floor for each of the bills that we looked at this session. And then to make progress on one of our biggest priorities, which is to make a dent in the efforts that we need to be doing to address climate change. So I think we did a bang-up job, as Senator Cleveland mentioned a minute ago. Those were the priorities we opened the session with, and we were hoping to just be able to finish session, but instead we're able to conclude with major progress in each of those areas and work to reverse our regressive tax structure so that our state is better served by the tax dollars we invest. So I'm just, again, proud of the session, proud of our constituents and the input that we've received, and proud to be a part of this team. So I thank you all.
We're coming out of a period of great divisiveness in our country and to some degree in our communities. Our legislative body gets along a lot better than the federal legislative body does. We had to work really hard to stay together and to work together and get things done. And we did it, and it was gracious and it was heartfelt. In my own community, people stepped up. You stepped up. And we need to keep doing this and build on it and mend the divisiveness that we've all experienced and we've all seen, and get at the root causes with the equity issues, making sure that we build on the future, and we build the kind of future and have the kind of vision that we want, and do it together. We had to work at it. Let's build on that work.
And well said, both of you. And I do absolutely agree. We have to lead with respect and civility. And I am so very honored to serve with these two tremendous individuals, but also to represent this amazing district. And can't thank you enough for staying in such close contact throughout session, sending your emails and your feedback, your guidance, as we considered so many very critical issues and policies this year. And I can't wait until we can all be together again. So get your vaccine, and let's end this pandemic and keep looking ahead to plan for the very best future that we can together.